Hello everyone, this is Sharul from the Web3 Passport, and today we have Paul Dylan-Ennis. Paul, you are a lecturer in UCD, and we are here today on the second day of Ethereum Dublin Web3 Hackathon, and it's the first ever Web3 Hackathon in Dublin organized by the Dublin team. So Paul, when did you first got introduced to Web3 and blockchain space?
So I've been involved with what's now called Web3, but at the time was simply called Bitcoin since 2012. So I'm a little bit of an old hand. So I got interested through a now kind of forgotten story, which is Silk Road. This was a darknet marketplace, as it was called, where they bought and sold like illicit substances. And I wasn't interested in the marketplace per se, but I was interested in the story, which was very dramatic. It was like a police manhunt and so on. And when I was reading the stories, what I started to notice is a reference constantly to some kind of new digital currency that couldn't be traced. And that's how we believed at the time was the truth. And so I began going to Bitcoin Talk. These were the forums back in the old times. And then slowly just immersed myself that way by learning about Bitcoin, learning about mining. So I was mining as well for a little while. And then the story just kind of takes off from there, but that's the origins. I'm an old Bitcoiner who has converted to Ethereum.
That's very interesting story of how you got started into the blockchain space. Yes, and as you said that, it was initially we only knew the term Bitcoin, and that was very prominent. And then you have also mentioned that then you transitioned from Bitcoin to Ethereum. Why was that?
There was it wasn't something that happened very quickly. So up until I imagine even 2017, I was pretty much a Bitcoiner. My research was on Bitcoin, my writing was on Bitcoin as well. But I started to notice the culture was shifting. It used to be a culture that was focused on more open source, just people who are interested in technology and so on. Money was an element of it, so there were always libertarians. However, there was a right-wing drift, essentially, in Bitcoin culture, which I identified with less and less at that time. So I used to see them as a counterculture, and the counterculture started to merge with this mainstream right-wing populist culture. And so I was a bit despondent, but I started to look into Ethereum. I just thought that there was something more interesting about Ethereum's more collaborative mindset. And also the possibilities. So with Bitcoin, you can only do one thing, really, send and receive money, although that's changed recently with ordinals and so on. But in Ethereum, the possibilities are much faster.
Interesting. That's a very good comparison that you have mentioned. May I also ask you, I'm looking at your tattoos. So is there any resemblance or reference to your passion for crypto and Bitcoin in your tattoos?
Yeah, so I have a Bitcoin BTC on my hand, so which will give you a sense that I was a serious Bitcoiner, and still consider myself a Bitcoiner, but just I no longer feel the culture that's there fully is the one that I would want to be hanging around with, but I still support the general concept. And then this is the Ethereum logo. So Ethereum, I was one of those attractions which happened very, very quickly for me. Like once I got involved, originally I was unsure, but once I discovered the potential of Ethereum, I fell like wholeheartedly for it. And then whenever that happens, I try to represent it with a tattoo and it marks the time when those feelings existed.
Certainly. And Paul, you have also mentioned about mining, that you have been mining. Do you still mine?
Unfortunately, it's not possible to mine Bitcoin anymore because the competition is so large. So successful miners today would be vast industrial operations.
Okay.
But at the time, you could mine at home, so you could use your CPU, your actual laptop, and you could then use your graphics card, and then you could buy sort of custom machines from China. It was a very interesting time, but I basically was crowded out by technological developments, so it became too expensive to participate very, very quickly.
Interesting. And as you are a lecturer at UCD, so what is your main subject matter expertise, or what do you lecture in?
So I started off when I started the job, I had to teach lots of different subjects. So I was the new person, so I had to teach subjects which are almost too boring to mention. Just like introduction to SQL, things like this.
All right.
So I wasn't very enthused about it, but luckily I was hired at the exact same time that blockchain, enterprise blockchain, corporate blockchain, sort of the business version of crypto, had become mainstream enough that the business department felt they needed to hire someone. So I slowly but surely turned my job into just complete focus on cryptocurrency, Web3 and blockchain. So at this point I only teach classes on cryptocurrency or Web3, nothing else. So it's and I had the first module on Ethereum called the Ethereum ecosystem. So that's the first international module solely dedicated to Ethereum.
Interesting, Paul. And that is taught in live classes in UCD? Or are there also virtual tutorials or lessons that are available?
No, it's an old-fashioned class that you attend, unfortunately.
Right. And Paul, all right, so here we're going to talk about some of the tweets because and your project PolarPunk. Okay, so before we get into tweets, we want to know about your project PolarPunk Labs. So I see that you're quite active on Twitter. And the name of the page is called PolarPunk Labs, and you have 11K followers on Twitter. So would you like to give some idea on what the project is about and what are you doing?
So I think, like, slightly unfortunately, when I came up with the name, I didn't think the account would get as popular as it is. So a lot of people believe it's a company or some sort, or there's some kind of more official project.
Right.
It sounds, like a company, but I just like the sound of it. And I always, if I ever did do some kind of business, it would be called PolarPunk Labs, essentially. But at the moment, it essentially just names I see it as the collection of writings that I tend to do. So the name comes from two places. One is that there's a movement called solarpunk, which is a very optimistic, technological, political ideology, which is popular in Ethereum, which essentially says that using more like thinking more clearly about technology, we could actually solve problems like climate change, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's also one called lunarpunk, which is more privacy focused and a bit more hard-nosed, a bit more serious, serious-minded. And so I tried to place myself in the middle, so somewhere between the sun and the moon. So I'm like polarpunk.
That's interesting.
And then also another element of it is I like to go deep into the history of things. So it's like an iceberg or something. So that my sort of signature thing would be to rediscover forgotten lore of the cryptocurrency history.
Interesting. So what has been the recent discovery like? So your research, what did you find?
Yeah, the most recent one was discovering that Azealia Banks, she's a musician who's kind of like semi-popular back in 2014 or something. She was one of the inspirations behind WorldCoin, which is now like Sam Altman, the OpenAI CEO. They have their own cryptocurrency called WorldCoin, where you scan people's irises using an orb. It's a sort of controversial project. Some people think it's amazing because it introduces some kind of blockchain identity. Other people find it very dystopian. And then I went back into the history and discovered that the art concept came from this kind of pop star originally.
Interesting. And what sources do you use to discover all these hidden gems or assets in the history?
So I do a lot of, they call it basically open source research. So effectively using a lot of like archival websites, going back and, let's say, search engines that are intentionally focused on obscure social media accounts, fan accounts, because that's where you find a lot of, so the main, like Instagram accounts, they tend to get deleted, but fan accounts don't, so you can kind of discover chunks of history that are, they try to wash away by focusing on their fans as opposed to them, and same with crypto.
Right, interesting, very interesting. So Paul, we have so much to talk to you about. So first of all, let's go, now going back to PolarPunk. So what's your vision for the labs, PolarPunk Labs? That's your personal project, looks like. Yes. When the community is so big, there are 11,000 followers, and how does everybody, contributing the value to each other through different tweets and maybe sharing a lot of new insights and information and learning from all your research as well from the platform? So
it is one of those situations where I didn't really expect to get so many followers. So it came about from a series of articles I wrote for CoinDesk a few years ago on Bitcoin maximalism, and essentially calling out what was seen as a very toxic culture on Twitter that were attacking people from the Ethereum community quite a bit. And that's where that influx originally came, and then people stuck around, and it started to snowball a little bit. But I'd say I don't see it as anything where I have some distinct goal. But what I have noticed is that I learn so much more from them. Like, so I from the people I interact with. So they very arbitrarily might have followed me a few years ago, but they're all very, very much involved in Ethereum. And so any problem I have when I'm stuck, if I can't figure something out, or oftentimes before I teach, if I can't figure out something, I'll just ask the group and then show my students. You know, I asked the hive mind, do they have an answer? And they usually do come up with the answer.
Very interesting. Yeah. Very interesting. Now let's go back to discussing some of the tweets. So I went to your Twitter and I was left amazed. I was scrolling through your Twitter for almost an hour and seeing all the fantastic and mind-blowing content. So we'll start with your first, one of the tweets here. That says, just watched Uncle Roger's every video over the course of 2 days AMA. So who is this Uncle Roger? I didn't want you to do my research because this was a question that I wanted to keep for you to answer for all.
So I think Uncle Roger is one of those things where it's super popular, but seems to be compartmentalized to a certain group of people. So, you know, every so often you'll come across something that's extremely popular, but for some reason you never heard about it. So he has, say, I don't know, 7.5 million followers on YouTube or something like that. And you're like, how did I not know about this before? And the reason I find it interesting, so it's just a caricature of like an older relative. So the comedian is Malaysian, and so it's about this, you know, his older Asian uncle who's maybe a little bit out of touch, maybe less PC than his nephew, and just playing on that sort of trope. And what I find fascinating about it is it's very similar in Ireland. So the character could easily be swapped in with like the Irish uncle. So I just thought it was very interesting. Yeah, I mean, like the jokes, there's like with just a slight tweak, like dropping out certain types of foods, you would have the exact same scenario.
Interesting. So we have an Irish uncle,
totally.
similar to Uncle Roger. Lovely. That's a good to know. And the second tweet let's go to is which says that I really enjoyed Bitcoin magazine. It's really enjoying Bitcoin magazine slowly coming out from under the laser eye. Nonsense. So what was your thought about that tweet, on that tweet?
Yeah, so I think probably my most, so there's a double-edged sword here in that most people who know me in Ethereum, who got to know me, would have known me as a kind of defender of Ethereum against what's known as Bitcoin maximalism. So, and because I was part of the Bitcoin culture before, I think it's not as easy for the Bitcoiners to, you know, use arguments that they think, you know, like I know Bitcoin as well as they do, I think. I have been around for them, as long as most of them, or even like much longer than some of them. So they can't hoodwink me, I think, as much as maybe they try to do with people. So I would try to intervene and defend people that I saw were getting bullied by these Bitcoin maximalists, or who were outright like misrepresenting the history, or just trying to, you know, propagandize in some kind of way. So the term for this is Bitcoin maximalism historically, which means they believe that only Bitcoin is legitimate and everything else is illegitimate.
Right,
but especially Ethereum is something they hate. They hate Ethereum passionately. Nowadays they don't tend to. Nowadays we tend to use the term laser eyes because it's a bit of nuance, but they're like maximalist and laser eyes. But basically it's the same kind of person that's kind of like aggressively pro Bitcoin. But in recent times, because someone discovered essentially how to make NFTs on Bitcoin called ordinals, there's been this this emergent culture of like NFT people, almost more like Ethereum people who've gone into Bitcoin, and they're changing the Bitcoin culture so that the maximalism is no longer so powerful. And so I feel like they're moving beyond it. They're post-maximalist.
Interesting, and that's something new that I have heard from you. So when did that start? When does that movement of leverage, trying to find opportunities in Bitcoin now, trying to get NFTs use case on Bitcoin? So when did that start? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, quite recently. So maybe only 6 months or so. So this is they're called ordinals. They were discovered.
Ordinals.
So it's possible to basically attach an image to the smallest unit of Bitcoin called a Satoshi. You can even make currencies like ERC20 tokens on Ethereum. There's BRC20s now. So all the stuff that's on, and that's a smart contract. So all the stuff that's on Ethereum can now be done on Bitcoin as well.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Probably I was following too much of Ethereum and Cardano and other projects, and I literally didn't look into what's going on in the Bitcoin space, because we were looking into Bitcoin as the source of, it's a source of saving, or a source of value to put your like an example of gold into the blockchain space, and I myself didn't look into that area. It's interesting to know. And now let's move on to this discussing your next tweet, and it was on one of the podcasts that you have had with the money culture team, and it says the relationship between money and culture is not often considered, but in reality, money plays a significant role in shaping our society's values and beliefs. And coming from India and have been to so many different countries, lived in South Africa and been to other developing nations and traveled the world, I do feel that money plays a significant role in shaping our belief system and our values and our whole society. So if you would like to throw some more light on that.
Yeah, when I'm starting with my class and I'm trying to introduce them to why, say, blockchains might be important, you begin with Bitcoin in a class typically, just because it's the original
case that we all started with Bitcoin.
And so you teach it with Bitcoin, and that means you begin with money. So you're not actually talking about like art or organization or finance. There's not, or kind of more tech applications. And so just to like when I'm playing around with this topic in the beginning, just trying to emphasize to students, just how pervasive money is in how we see everything. It's how we judge people. Whether like in various types of status, you can even just be personality about like, someone's cheap or something like that, or reckless with money. Everything you do in some sense, things you don't want to do and things you do want to do are all tied up with money. And so in some way, money kind of infuses your life in this totalizing sort of way. But at the same time, it's something most of us don't really understand how it actually works. What's the origin of money? So we have some stories that we tell each other about barter and so on.
Would you like to share one of the stories, if it doesn't take longer, or?
You mean about barter?
Barter system.
So I mean, this is like the mainstream economics textbooks would just say that there's a
barter system. It's a text on its own. It's a book written on that.
Almost like if you do like economics in university, then the first time they talk about money, they'll say the reason money exists is because people, there wasn't a coincidence of wants. I wanted to trade something with you, but it's a mismatch. So instead, we needed to basically remove barter and replace it with something that could be that like would represent, like if you give me 50 of these, then I can buy 30 of something off you in the future.
And there was evolution of that too, that some kingdoms would trade money into like very heavy coins of iron or copper, and there was that evolutionary aspect that I read in one of the Bitcoin training that I have gone through. I think they do it in the first episode of this training, that starting from barter to so many different ways of trading that was used, and then money was introduced. Right.
Yeah, and I mean, so like the Bitcoin story, like it has its own version of like it twists the evolution story, except it says now the culmination of the evolution isn't like people, like in the sense like that traditional evolution was almost seen as a progression toward people or something. To them, it's like Bitcoin is the evolutionary endpoint. But I try to approach it as I guess what I'm saying is that money is central to the blockchain story in some kind of interesting way. It's like it's caught up with the original mission of what blockchains are supposed to be, But I do think there's also a way in which the attachment of money and blockchain culture is a problem. Because one, it means that for a lot of people, in as much as they understand what crypto is, they think it's all money. It's all focused on like monetary.
Money aspect, yeah, monetary.
Whereas, you know, like Ethereum is not primarily a form of money. Like it has a money, but the money is a crypto fuel that's supposed to power the assets.
Yeah.
So it's closer to our traditional type of money, which is supposed to be a productive unit in society. It's not supposed to be like gold that you hoard and you save. It's supposed to be put to use. So Ethereum has its own monetary culture, which doesn't get talked about enough. And on that podcast, that's what I was trying to get at. That, you know, Ethereum should more vocally advocate for its own monetary culture, as opposed to people thinking it's Bitcoins.
Interesting. And so is that the solution to the tweet that you've mentioned, money plays a significant role in shaping our society values and beliefs? So what would be the solution to that, the ultimate solution from your point of view? How can we change that? How can this blockchain or the new tech can change that?
Yeah.
And I know there can be different perspective to this as well.
Yeah, on
towards
this
transformation.
On this, I'm kind of, so if there was a spectrum of different ways that people look at Ethereum, some people see it as like a more global project, that we're trying to create something that everybody has sort of like access to, and so the power of it is like a globalizing
right,
force.
Me too. I was of the same opinion as well.
Yeah, I take the other, there is another kind of camp that exists in Ethereum, which would be more localist. And I think what Ethereum would work best as is a mechanism that allows smaller communities to create their own, let's say, it could be like their own money system, it could be their own organization system, their own type of doing art. My worry about a blockchain like Ethereum is that it could have this it could have an effect where it flattens everything out. You know, if we're all using the exact same protocols, the exact same specifications, the exact same type of money, it could have the opposite effect on us. It could basically generate a new type of whatever the capitalism is now that people are trying to push back against.
Interesting.
So, yeah, so I'm more of a promoter of like micro cultures, micro money is the way we should go. So using the tools, like using a DAO to create a community that is secure, but like completely independent from the rest of the Ethereum culture.
Interesting. Paul, so on Ethereum, right, we can build dApps, and there can be dApps to support NFT artists, applications that artists can use, and there are so many use cases. And as we just discussed, that this can create microcultures, and it might have its challenges. So probably we might end up creating another kind of capitalism. So can you give us one example of how do you see that happening, or the ways to prevent that?
Yeah, so I think there's a characteristic that you see among the more unique and distinct projects that exist in crypto, the ones that are like genuinely different from like everything else that exists. So there are, for example, the Bored Ape Yacht Club that everybody knows. That smart contract famously contains a mistake. There's a mistake in it, which means the sequence is kind of out of order. And that sequence reappears in thousands and thousands of contracts because it gets copied blindly by people who don't know, and they're just sort of like replicating the form. And so I do feel that we're saturated by that. And then the only real, I guess, beacon of light that I tend to see would be projects. The example that I would typically give people, it would be Gitcoin. So Gitcoin is a smart contract with a very interesting theoretical aspect to it. So it isn't just simply a smart contract with a technical underpinning, but there is some kind of philosophy that guides it. So the people who are interested in Gitcoin, they call themselves regens or regenerative. And so they try to build Gitcoin on the principles of public goods and generating positive externalities for societies, as opposed to negative ones like, as they see, Meta, Google, etc. So they're trying to overcome that. And so into their building their smart contract, they include this idea of quadratic funding. And so it's a mechanism by which people there's a big pool of money, and then you can create a grant and you want to get funded. And then the money will be sent to like somebody who's building something non-profit in Ethereum. But the clever part is the quadratic funding mechanism means if I am a large donor, then my donation doesn't really get matched. But if I'm a small donor, then it gets quadrupled. And so it's basically a way for smaller voices to get their, so the big guy can't just come in and say, I'm going to back this person. It allows lots of small voices to have a chance to be recognized. So there's some kind of attempt to think of something innovative, a new way of doing economics that creates as much, positive externalities for the Ethereum ecosystem and keeps the nonprofit stuff funded as well. Retroactive public goods funding is also kind of something you would see in Optimism. So Optimism is a layer 2, and they have a DAO, and in the DAO there's like delegates, and the delegates will, they'll look back at stuff that's been done by people to help out the community in the past, and they'll fund them as well. So I do think there are ways to. It's a lot to do with how you're organized, what your beliefs are, and if you don't have those beliefs, if you're just interested in the degen financial nihilism, then you just end up replicating the smart contracts because you don't really have a novel idea. You're just repeating other people's work. So I think we need more Gitcoin and Optimism.
Interesting, very interesting. I am left a bit amazed, and I'm still thinking. And so it's a very new information for me as well. The concepts and the whole aspect to it that you have just shared. Paul, I'm intrigued by all the knowledge that you have shared in the session, and I would like you to give us some light on the panel that you have attended this morning with in the conference day 2.
Yeah, the early morning conference was from 4 Irish artists, like Web3 NFT artists. The first thing that I think is worth mentioning is it's actually really, I call people out about this on Twitter quite a bit, which is I'm always amazed about like why so many, not like many panels are kind of like male. It's not necessarily why so many panels are male so much as like how would you in 2023 still be building the conference and you never realize that like all of your panels are like that. So it was nice to kind of begin that way. Right. And I think what they were all generally speaking to was they all are essentially people who have worked in the traditional art world before. So they understand what it means to kind of pre-exist, the kind of Web3 blockchain space. And they were, essentially they were just focusing on the, actually they were calling up the technical terminology quite a bit. They call it Nerdsville. So it was, but that is definitely, so I think that kind of like Web3 subculture, I've often credited as bringing in a freshness into crypto. For a long time, Ethereum culture was really in need of an aesthetic, and it's the NFT subculture that brought the aesthetic in, and that's why Ethereum stuff looks good, whereas Bitcoin stuff doesn't.
Very interesting. So that's all goes to NFTs that brought an aesthetic. How nicely said, and it's another enlightening thought that you have shared. And you have also given a workshop today on Ethereum values and culture. Would you also share some insights from that workshop, and how do you see the future to be, like in a decade, how the culture should be evolving, and what value Ethereum, what new value will be creating?
Yeah, so my research question in general is very simple, but it's deceptively simple. And this is what I try to build a talk on. It's what is Ethereum? So when I'm teaching and when I'm giving talks, I like to tell everybody that I don't know what Ethereum is. That's the only thing that I'm sort of obsessively trying to answer. That's my ultimate goal. And so I work through some of the traditional definitions, so the ones that people say but may not necessarily know where they come from. So I try to show them the origins. So Web3, for example, is a term that comes from one of the co-founders of Ethereum, Gavin Wood, but it also comes from an old model of Ethereum, which used to be chat, file, and the sort of smart contracts. It was going to be a full web experience, so it's some lost history. And then when I go through all the different, terms that have been proposed for Ethereum over the year, I essentially point out that they're all those technical descriptions of an infrastructure, whereas if you ask a Bitcoiner what it's about, they'll tell you things like Bitcoin is about the transition to hyper-Bitcoinization. They have a full story, a full narrative, and we don't have that. We don't have any long-term vision for Ethereum, and that's a problem.
Interesting. All right, so we don't have a long-term vision for Ethereum. So, and how about the roadmap? Do we have a roadmap for Ethereum? I'm just curious because I didn't look into a roadmap for Ethereum yet.
Yeah, there's a like a technical roadmap, as in it's very like it's very very technical. The only reason you would even be looking at it is if you are a hardened like Ethereum researcher. It's got like this funny thing. It's called like the splurge, the splurge, the verge. There's a bunch of other ones. I should know this, but I'm scared of the roadmap. It's so complicated. But it, like the roadmap is fine as a technical roadmap, but it is literally all the upgrades, like the merge that happened, is like the first one amongst 5 or 6. Take about 7 years before Ethereum ossifies and kind of like stops being updated. But there isn't a roadmap in terms of what Ethereum is supposed to achieve. Like, is it just for people to build stuff on? Is it just like supposed to be a neutral infrastructure? So it's almost like the internet, as some people like to put it. So that's to me, it's like it's not even the case that could be the answer, but we don't really talk about that very much. We don't talk about Ethereum values and the narrative.
So that's very risky, because when we're not talking about values and how we want this culture to evolve, there is no set imagination, or there is no set criteria to it, some sort of manifesto, right? So we might be lost on the way. How do we avoid that risk of being lost, or maybe creating something different to what we want to achieve?
Yeah,
right.
yeah, and that is exactly...
There is a risk there.
Yeah, and I mean, it's already, in a sense, happened. I mean, it's happened a few times in Ethereum. ICOs, the initial coin offerings, is a good example of a speculative mania, which almost destroyed Ethereum. The DAO hack could be seen as another one. More recently, the return of meme coins, so the Pepe and Ben, all this kind of thing.
It's happening again.
Yeah, so this is the oldest art of crypto, is like the meme coin of some sort. But it's so it shows that there's a real like the presence of those meme coins like really is a signal that there's something a little bit off. It's in the absence of a real message of what's acceptable culturally. Now you can't do anything technically because permissionlessness means you can't actually exclude anybody from the chain. But because there's a vacuum of a story and a narrative, I think that's why we get some people collapse into, well, it's nothing. It's like nihilistic. It means nothing. It's just about the speculative game. And if there's no counter narrative, there's no reason for them not to believe that. It's a perfectly acceptable, rational position. So my work is sort of an attempt to say there is like a counter narrative. It's just that it's not discussed very often.
Interesting. So everyone who is building on Ethereum and is leveraging Ethereum right now to build interesting projects and apps for Web3. So what our steps should be? Are there recommendations for everyone who is using Ethereum as a foundational layer?
Yeah, I think that what I try to encourage is people to, like, say, for example, at this event itself, right? It's called ETH Dublin, but all the panels and all the talks, everyone says Web3, right? They don't use the word Ethereum.
Yes, yeah.
And so there's this interesting way in which Ethereum itself is obscured, and it's almost like as if somebody else is doing it, the work. And if you are in the mix of that world where you're following the organizers, the researchers, and the people who are like the 50 to 100 people who are like holding the thing up, then you really realize that, they're like a little bit unloved, given the amount of work that they do. So I do think there should be more of an emphasis on all the projects that are around to get to further ensure that the infrastructure of Ethereum is shored up. But I also like to see more work about the kind of narrative and educating people about things like decentralization, censorship resistance, and permissionlessness. So I'd say they're the three main kind of properties of Ethereum. But how familiar the average sort of like NFT Web3 person is about them is, it's not always super strong there. I think that should be almost like foundational civilizational knowledge in Ethereum, and then you can forget it as you move on, but it should be there at some point, or else you can get dragged into the way to put this is the degen funnel. So you have a choice in the beginning. You can be pulled into the degen world or the regen world, and so the funnel to the regen world should be supported more, I think.
Interesting. another enlightening thoughts from you, and I do agree that yes, as you said, that this event is a Ethereum Dublin event, and we should surface the name, the whole project more than only explicitly talking about Web 2 and Web 3. We should be more focusing on the key technology and bringing that name out, bringing that project out, because of all the hard work that those technical people and those developers and the team is doing at their end. I agree. I truly agree that we should be promoting the Ethereum as the concept, as a project, as a technology more than using the more generic naming or terminology. That's how I should say it.
Yeah.
And Paul, this has been so enlightening discussion for me. I'm learning a lot, and so for the audience. Now, I want to know that in your day-to-day, how your day-to-day looks like as a lecturer, and how these technologies are embedded into your lifestyle. Certainly they are, because you are lecturing into crypto and blockchain and Bitcoin, Ethereum space. And yes, tell us more about.
So my day-to-day it's not dissimilar from the average enthusiast in a way, except whereas they have to do the enthusiasm maybe at night or outside work, I just do it in the day. So it's like I'm being paid to be a crypto enthusiast in some kind of way, and I'm able to professionalize it. So I can wake up and the first thing I do is, I'm reading. First, I have to read the academic articles. It's not too many of them, but I'm supposed to keep up on the literature. I'm not super enthused by it. Like that's the least academic I've been called before, in the sense that I hate all the like overly formal academic stuff and try to keep it as minimum as possible. But then after that, it really is a case of keeping up on everything. So having to follow all the latest kind of like Ethereum stories, like the kind of drama happening in real time. And then I have to cut that off at a certain point, and I have to go the deep dive stuff, which a lot of people don't get to do. That's the part that's like you can be following Ethereum, and have a pretty good following of it, but you basically don't have a few hours every day to say, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to do nothing but read about layer 2. And then I can actually sit down and learn about layer 2, whereas normally most people wouldn't have that chance. So that's sort of what I'm doing, just trying to build it up. And then the writing as well. So I do a little bit of writing every day. Like not all of it's very good. So I try to do media writing, because I do CoinDesk as well. So I try to mix academic writing and non-academic writing. So it really is just a case of like waking up and like immersing myself. And then I completely cut it off. And I think that's something I'd also stress to people, that they should have something else. Like there should be I'm like after 6 p.m. like I won't look at crypto at all. So I definitely recommend that as a
interesting.
Get into. You should have at least 2 hobbies.
Right, absolutely, Paul. I mean, it's so great to have you here today. It's so nice to have met you, to know about your great work, and to learn all these deep the concepts that we deep dived into as a part of this conversation today. And I'm sure there is a lot more to explore and go deeper into the concepts that you have given light on. So probably I look forward to having the next conversation with you, and to get to understand more and get more into the technological side, and maybe talk a bit about how can we avoid that capitalism appearing in this space, and so much more from so many different perspectives that you still have to share with us. So thank you for this incredible conversation. It's very enlightening, certainly enlightening for me. I'm flabbergasted.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your time today.